Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of our Hot Topics show. And it would be broadcasting malpractice if I didn't use this Hot Topics to talk about what transpired this past weekend in the world of boxing, because it was a weekend that was filled with boxing action from two different locations, ironically, in the same city, in New York City. One was an all-women's bout, and the other featured all top male fights on top of the card. Friday night was a much anticipated evening on the 11th with Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor in the third of their fights together. As it turned out, this one was quite different than the first two that they had. This was a more strategic affair in which both fighters were more cautious. They boxed, and both were looking for counter punches, especially Taylor. Serrano did press the action in many instances, which was the way the first two fights went as well. They did not engage with each other as much as they did in the other fights, but like the other two fights, it was razor thin. Katie Taylor ended up getting the nod in this fight, a decision that I don't think too many people quibble with. Even I think Amanda Serrano and her camp understand that maybe she didn't quite get enough done offensively in this fight. Taylor was a little crisper and sharper with her counter punches. And so they, in all likelihood, ended their competition against each other. The first two fights, wildly exciting. In my humble opinion, I would have probably given Serrano the decision in the first two. They both went to Taylor. This one, I thought Katie Taylor won. In any case, here's what we all have to take away from I think, from the trilogy, in my opinion. Two remarkable women who are among the best that have ever done it in the women's game, and both headed to the Hall of Fame for sure, and both have made their marks on that sport in a unique and dramatic way. And at the end of the day, that's, to me, the bottom line of all of this. They had a phenomenal competition. It was razor thin. If they fought 10 times, it would be a close fight. And even though this one had a slightly different tenor to it, it too was a close fight. A historical reference that is, to me, kind of fits is back when Chiquita Gonzalez fought Michael Carbajal. And I did that first fight that they had. It was a wild brawl in which both men were down, and Carbajal won by knockout. And they were going to fight again, and Chiquita Gonzalez had never been in anything other than a wild fight. And Carbajal himself, a very aggressive knockout artist kind of fighter for the lower weights. The second fight after that wild brawl, Chiquita Gonzalez did something no one thought he could possibly ever did. He became a complete boxer and boxed his way to a victory, and then did it again in their third fight. So the tenor of those fights totally changed. And that was what happened here when the tenor of this fight was totally different than what had preceded it. I thought immediately of the Chiquita Gonzalez and Michael Carbajal situation, where you would never, if you only saw the second fight, you would never think these two would have engaged in the kind of insane fight that they did the first time out. Also on Friday night, very important fight in the 168-pound division. Two champions trying to unify titles, Shedasia Green and Savannah Marshall. Savannah Marshall came into that fight off a 2-year layoff, and it showed. She had some ring rust. She wasn't as sharp overall as we've seen in some other efforts. Didn't fight poorly by any stretch of the imagination. And her fight with Shedasia Green was a competitive, pretty close fight. Green ended up getting the decision, and I think probably rightfully so. It was a very, again, close fight, but Green seemed to get a little bit more done, and there were a couple occasions where she rocked Savannah Marshall. Marshall had been off for the 2 years, had only had one MMA fight in that period, and she's in her mid-30s, so coming back off that kind of layoff in your mid-30s is not the easiest. Her mission now, it strikes me, is to stay active, get back for another title shot somewhere, whether it's against Green or Franchon Cruz-Dezern, who I just announced her last fight, and she's somebody that could be fought for sure by Savannah Marshall. They fought once before, and Marshall ended up winning that fight to get a title. So for Marshall, that's probably the ticket. For Shedasia Green, well, that win was a good one for her. She didn't get a knockout. She used to be a knockout machine, constantly getting knockouts. Last 4 fights, and now this 5th one, she hasn't gotten a knockout, but she performed well and did not fade in later rounds, which sometimes she has done. And so for her, that opens up all kinds of possibilities. Who knows if she wants to move up in weight, if Claressa Shields, who's going to fight on July 26th in the heavyweight division, stays at the higher weights, Green could jump up a little bit in weight. Maybe that would be a match that would be of interest. It's certainly one that people thought about before. Also on that card Friday night, somebody that made a statement was Ellie Scotney, who defended her title and unified against another champion, Yamilet Mercado, who's a very good fighter. And Scotney, while it was a competitive fight in a lot of ways, Scotney clearly won and clearly controlled the action virtually all the time. And it was a really good performance. Ellie Scotney is someone that I think in the sport of women's boxing we see as really a potential superstar. And she showed exactly why in this fight. And now somebody that has jumped up to her weight class, Skye Nicholson, could be an interesting challenge for her. Skye, of course, a former champion at a lower weight class, now up where Scotney is, and that would be a big fight, a marketable fight, especially in Europe. And Nicholson would be, I think, she brings a lot to the table, as does Scotney, and I think that's a fight in the women's side that would make a lot of sense. And this may have set that up. So all in all, a good card on Friday night with many women's champions involved at Madison Square Garden, and it was a great night. Saturday night was something extraordinary. Saturday night turned out to be exactly what we thought it was going to be. The Ring Magazine, the 3rd Ring Magazine edition of boxing, when you looked at the matches leading up to it, you thought, this has amazing potential to be great. And it was exactly that. Exciting and well-fought boxing. And the evening started out, or at least the televised portion of the evening, the main part of it, started out with a 168-pound match that was extraordinarily entertaining and action-filled, with David Morrell taking on Eman Katayev, 2 168-pounders ranked just toward the bottom of the top 10 in the rankings. David Morrell, of course, had fought David Benavides in that exciting match that he lost by decision, but Morrell demonstrated what a good fighter he was in that fight. And Eman Katayev came in undefeated at 10-0 with a brilliant amateur career prior to that. And despite the odds being kind of long against him, most of the folks that know boxing and cover it didn't think he was that big an underdog. And he demonstrated that in this fight. He lost a decision, a split decision to David Morrell. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this hot topic. But the fight itself, judging irregardless, in which Morrell won a decision, the fight itself was wildly exciting and extremely well fought, and that was the tenor of the evening. It was followed by a fight that showed us why the 140-pound division is, in my opinion, the best in boxing, the deepest in boxing. Subriel Matias, former champion, took on Alberto Puello for one of the 140-pound straps, and they delivered precisely what everybody thought they were going to deliver. A very, very entertaining and exciting match that went the distance. Now, there could have been a knockout in this fight. You could have foreseen it, but it didn't work out that way. Instead, it was nonstop action, back and forth. And Matias ended up winning a close decision in what was a very competitive fight. Some quibble with the decision. It was very, very close. I thought you could certainly make a strong case for giving it to Matias. But nobody would be sad to see a rematch between those two men. But right now, Matias has that title, and I'm sure he's, he's coveting it. That's for sure. That story had a lot of plot lines going on throughout in terms of the strategy and the abilities of both men. Matias is known to be a slow starter. He was able to, pick up the pace and continue it in that fight. And Puello did a great job of hanging in there with the aggression of Matias. And they fought a superb fight. Hazam Shiraz, sporting his new trainer, Andy Lee, moved up in weight to take on Edgar Berlanga. And he produced a performance that was extraordinary. Coming off a less than great performance against Carlos Adames down at middleweight, for a middleweight title to end up in a draw that some people felt should have gone to Adames. Shiraz was coming in with a lot of questions into this fight, and here he is moving up to 168. Well, he made a statement at this new weight. He showed people that his frame, which everybody thought could handle 168, does in fact handle that weight very well. He showed power. He showed precision in what he did. Everybody knows he's a capable boxer. And apparently he and Andy Lee are a very good team, because Shiraz made very, very quick work, if you will, of Edgar Berlanga. Not quick work in terms of getting him out immediately, but in terms of showing his dominance and then ultimately stopping Edgar Berlanga. Now, Edgar Berlanga is a complicated story in boxing, because even with all the success he had that got him to the fight with Canelo Alvarez, that some people believe he didn't deserve that shot, he hung in against Alvarez, though he did not win. And many felt that demonstrated that he was a viable top 168-pounder. This loss doesn't help his case for that. And people overreact one way or the other either way. So we don't know at the end of the day now whether Edgar Berlanga can beat top 168-pounders. Many people will say absolutely not, because he hasn't yet. In his last two fights against top 168-pounders, he failed. But for Shiraz, maybe awaiting him at some point is a fight with Canelo Alvarez. Assuming Canelo Alvarez beats Bud Crawford in the next fight, will he be the man that could fight Canelo Alvarez? And was this very dominant victory enough to cement a fight like that from a marketability standpoint? Does he become, a viable opponent for Canelo Alvarez? We're going to find all that out. The jewel of the evening, perhaps, on Saturday night, depending on how you look at it, might have been Shakur Stevenson and William Zepeda. Not only were these two excellent fighters coming in with a lot of expectations and a lot of excitement to see them get into the ring as perhaps, certainly two of the top lightweights in the world. And they did not disappoint. And Shakur Stevenson especially did not disappoint. Fighters that want to aspire to greatness all have a hallmark, I think, and that is they perform their best against the best competition they face. And that's what Shakur Stevenson did in this fight. It was the best fighter he's faced in his career, and he fought his best fight. He slightly altered his approach, less lateral movement, less boxing, more staying in the pocket against a very tough man, a volume puncher in William Zepeda, who during the course of this fight landed more power shots than anyone else has ever landed against Shakur Stevenson, 153 power shots or anything other than a jab. Many of those were body shots. That's what Zepeda does. But despite that success, it was clearly a fight that Shakur Stevenson won. He controlled it. He landed over 50% of his power punches in this fight, which is extraordinary. I think 55% or a little higher. He was remarkable. And it was a performance that it was, I think, I don't want to say a career changing, because clearly his career has been on that track of constantly winning and constantly being successful, but career altering in a sense, because some of the people that have criticized Shakur Stevenson for being less than entertaining and not as willing to engage opponents, well, right now that's out the window, because what he did against William Zepeda was extraordinary. And hats off to Shakur Stevenson for doing that, setting up all kinds of possible great fights at 135. Certainly everybody wants to see him against Gervonta Davis, though with Gervonta Davis's recent troubles, his future in boxing clouded at the moment. And then even at 140 pounds, who knows what could happen. It's a great division, as I pointed out. And if Shakur Stevenson can be effective at that division, there's a million great fights up there for him. So, brilliant performance by him. William Zepeda has nothing to be ashamed of. And by the way, even though there's no question Shakur Stevenson won this fight, you can make a strong case for William Zepeda at least getting a few more rounds from the judges during the course of this fight. I thought he won a couple more rounds than they gave him for sure. And that brings us to the one topic of the evening that wasn't so positive. And that is specific judging. And it is focused on that first fight of the evening, which is, in my way of thinking, one of the worst decisions I've seen in boxing in years and years. David Morrell was handed a split decision win over Eman Katayev. It was a very exciting fight, as I pointed out. There was a lot of give and take in that match. But it is impossible for me to imagine Katayev not winning the fight. And it's especially impossible for me to imagine one of the scores that were turned in. It ended up being a split decision in which all three judges got it wrong, even the one that picked Katayev to win. There was a knockdown in the fifth round that Katayev had over Morrell. So that makes that a 10-8 round. So bear that in mind as I explain this to you. Alan Nace scored at 95-94 for Katayev. Now what that means is he scored the fight 5 rounds each. And the knockdown is what gave Katayev the win. That's absurd. Or Tom Lundy did. I'm sorry, not Alanase. I apologize. Tony Lundy scored it for Katayev, 95-94. And as I say, that's wrong. Because it wasn't a 5-5 fight. In this fight, there is no humanly possible way to say that Katayev didn't win at least 6 rounds, possibly 7. So with that and the knockdown, it made it a 10-8 round. The most appropriate score, or one of the most appropriate scores, would have been 96-93 for Katayev to win this fight. Funny I should bring up 96-93 because that is exactly how John McKay had the fight scored, but for Morrell. So let's think about this. John McKay gave 7 rounds of the fight to David Morrell. And which is a virtual impossibility in my mind, and ended up with a 96-93 score, which is staggering. That's one of the worst boxing cards I've seen handed in by anybody in a long, long time. John McKay should be suspended from judging boxing matches for at least a year. Just that's what should happen. Ellen Nace made it 95-94 for Morrell. I mean, she gave him 6 rounds in the fight. And that's impossible. Just wasn't what happened. And the most you can find for David Morrell is 4 rounds in that fight. And that's being generous. Okay, that's being generous. So if it's a 6-4 fight for Katayev, he is winning that fight by a good margin. Okay? It's the way it is. He's winning 96-93. So you ask yourself, how did we all arrive here at that? There are only 2 possibilities, obviously, bias or incompetence. If you pay attention to the rounds, you know what happens. You know what happened in the fight. So my issue with this is that when you have somebody who is the favorite in the fight, as David Morrell was, and who is better known in the fight, as David Morrell was, what happens is they kind of start out a point or 2 ahead. I'm sorry to say this, but we've seen it over and over again, and especially in the early rounds where it takes a couple of rounds for judges to kind of, if the rounds are even moderately close, for them to get on board with the idea that, the other guy might be good. Which also is part of the narrative of this fight. It was absurd, and I direct this at the broadcasters and the media covering the fight. Absurd for anybody who is a pundit or covering boxing to think that Katayev didn't have a chance to win this fight, or that he was this hopeless underdog. All you had to do was watch video, look at look at his record, look at where they were at, how they fought, and you shouldn't arrive at that. That kind of perception, which sadly doesn't just affect a fight being covered or announced, it affects the judges, which it shouldn't under any circumstances, but it does constantly. And it's a very nettlesome thing to me. I'm normally not the guy that goes off on a diatribe like this. I'm not really that guy. And I'm certainly not that guy when I announce the actual fight. I will point out it's controversial and say that it will be certainly questioned by people, but I'm not going to do this kind of diatribe on a broadcast. I just don't do that. But I'm willing to say that, a decision seems inappropriate for sure. and this one certainly did. So on a night that gave us phenomenal boxing, unfortunately, poor officiating reared its ugly head again, and kind of left a little bit of a bitter taste in the mouths of many as they looked at it. But that having been said, what transpired in the ring on Saturday night, and also, let's say Friday night, added flavor to the weekend, more than flavor. There were a lot of good moments on Friday night, and the matches were fun, and it was filled. The women that fought filled up Madison Square Garden, and I'm sure got a tremendous viewership on Netflix. And so the weekend for boxing in general, a very good one, and boxing fans were, I think, winners because they were able to see that kind of action. So that's my view of this weekend, and we'll see you next time on Hot Topics.